Good morning and welcome back to Artist for a Day. Today we're going to do things a little bit differently for episode 3. We're going to take a little bit more time over the video today. There's a couple of people who've commented that they'd be interested in seeing a bit of a longer video and seeing a little bit more detail. So we're going to split it into two. This first part I'm going to talk about some theory and in the second part then I'll do some practical exercises as well. You'll also notice I'm wearing quite a lot more clothes than last time because it's pretty cold, but I'm sure that you'll follow along. Talking of following along, I just want to give a little shout out to a very inspiring young girl living here in Stavanger who watched the last video that I made about mark making, and with the support of her parents she went out and got some of the materials, some paper and some crayons and some paints, and she did her own version of the process. And she visited the studio yesterday and she brought me one of the artworks that she made, and I just think this is absolutely amazing. She's done her taping down, she's made her automatic actions, she's laid out some colour to give it a real density, and she did lots and lots of these and she's really looking forward to doing more, and I can't help but feel super excited and happy about this because it shows that the formula works, but every time I do it, every time she does it, every time you do it, it's going to give completely different results, but you're going to learn to be more familiar with your mark making, and that was the whole point of this exercise. And it acts like a class, and that's kind of really what this is. I wanted these videos to be like a class, a little workshop at the studio. So I thought today I would go on from last week's mark making and look at a topic called detail. Now, back in 2012 I started making some notes for what I thought would be maybe an essay or a small book about non-figurative and non-representational painting called Towards Detail. And in these notes I started to gather together a lot of the thoughts I was having about how it's possible for painters and paintings that are seemingly of nothing to also be very, very detailed. Our eyes register colour, shape, composition, tone, weight and form, even when we're not finding specific objects, like say in a landscape painting. Your eye would naturally shift to identify a tree or a hill or an animal. I believe in non-representational painting there is the same amount of detail that can be found and enjoyed, and often it's more for the eye, like looking out at a real scene of nature. You can't stand and look out at the mountains and pick out every single bit of what you're seeing and explain to your eye why it makes sense. No, it all just goes in, and your eyes and your brain process it all and give you a feeling of totality. And that's what happens in non-representational painting. It's most clear in painters who are very determined to continue evolving their visual language. And I'm going to pop up a few visual examples of a handful of painters who are very, very good examples of this, in case you've never heard of them. One of them is the Dutch painter Willem de Kooning. He also moved to the States and was the founding father of abstract expressionism. I think I'll choose his painting, one called Excavation. You can see in that a real determined effort to create a visual language all the way across the canvas. Our eye thinks we're seeing things everywhere, but we're not being forced to identify objects. We're being asked to enter into the language of the painting. There is so much detail without specific themes. I think another good example of a painter who does that, who we're very familiar with, is Jackson Pollock We know of his later work, a lot of the drips, which I think in schools a lot of people are shown. He did a painting before he worked out that drip way of painting, called, I think, Guardians of the Secret. And in that painting he painted a sort of a motif with figures around the side, and in the middle he painted something that looks like his later paintings. So it's kind of like he was seeing what he would arrive at several years later. And often that happens when you're working in the visual language of a painting. You're so focused on making the internal language work that often small areas of the painting can be perfect edits, perfect examples. Another episode I'm going to talk about scale and how that works in this discussion. By that I mean that an image that big and an image that big can be exactly the same composition, but if they're good proportions, they'll still work. And I think Pollock knew this, and he was working it out, and he was clever enough to not rush past it, but to keep working on it. Another great example of a detail-oriented painter. I'm a little bit in doubt who to choose here. I think I might save my personal favourite painter, Richard Diebenkorn, for another day, and I'll use one that might be more familiar, and I'll say Pablo Picasso. Now, we all are so familiar with Picasso. We think we know of all the things he's done, but it's very obvious that he was constantly shifting and changing his visual language to suit his ideas and his themes. And it's very hard to grasp how much he changed and evolved through his entire career. And the amount of work he produced is quite unbelievable. But in every drawing, every painting, he was making his lines and his colour use and his shape language convey to us, the viewer, a believable version of events. So I don't believe that he was really trying to make us think about someone, a specific person sitting here or a specific event happening. He was playing the magician. He was conjuring with forms and lines and shapes. And I think when we go back to this idea of detail, he was a real master at using details, mark-making details like we talked about last week, to give us the impression of something we think we understand. He was perhaps the great figure that ended the era of representational and started to come into non-representational painting. And I'll talk about some more of those famous painters another week. I think it's a really good idea to mention a book that can be very helpful for these topics and more. This is one that I had when I was studying, and it's a really important text for anybody interested in painting. And remember, we are talking predominantly about painting here. That's what I concentrate most on, and it's what a lot of the people I'm referring to are most known for. And this book's called The Shock of the New by a wonderful writer called Robert Hughes. Art and the Century of Change. It's from the 1800s into the 1900s, and it's broken into very interesting chapters, and if nothing else, it helps to show that all art and the ideas within art are all happening and existing in a kind of flux at the same time. Nothing happens in isolation. So things that reflect society and politics and gender ideas, developments in how art can be made, are all informing and available to the artist whenever they choose to make the work that they're going to make. So this comes back to the detail of the individual, and as we talked about last week, the mark-making signature of the individual. Because when there's so much at stake, The only thing that's worth really putting the work in is developing your own visual language. And this is an excellent book studying the unique visual language of some very important artists of the last 150 years. What I'd like to do now is to show you some examples of what I'm talking about with detail, how we can recognize detail and how we can manipulate detail on a large scale. So what I'm going to do is take this piece down, tape up a big new piece of paper, and we'll look at some practical examples. And thanks for following along. See you in a minute. Okay, so now we're set up. So I thought what we'll do is we'll look at 3 different types of mark making that denote detail, that are not really of anything, but the eye starts to make understandable and recognisable patterns and forms out of. So we'll split the canvas into 3, just for the sake of it. Give us 3 forms. And then here, let's look at up and down lines. So we're doing nothing. But looking at lines. Making details of ups and downs. The more we do it, the more maybe we just want to fill some in. What I want to do is I want to find a bit more of a chalk. Like this. Like this. Then get a brush. And again, I'm not making anything recognisable. I'm not doing anything, but I'm making marks. I'm concentrating on the details of the marks that I'm making, and I'm seeing what they're going to start to suggest to me might be interesting. And again, if we're doing this, then it's not long before even our own eye, or any eye, maybe starts to think of things. What do you see? I mean, I know I start to maybe see, looking through some trees or some woodland. So that kind of leads me in a direction. Maybe I want to pick out a little bit of light. The way that I've done this and spaced it out, it means naturally that the way my arm has gone, these are a little bit shorter, these are a little bit longer. So already your own mark making can be guiding you towards the composition that you're making. And it's up to you to make it look right, how you want it to look. And you start to get a sense of weight, proportion and dynamics. And there's detail without it being of anything, but we find our own place in it. Let's try another one with only diagonal lines. I don't know about you, but for me, it doesn't take long. If I'm working with diagonals to start to be seeing, let's take a bigger brush so that it's easier to do, something kind of a little bit more landscapey. Start to pick out that. And again, I'm not suggesting that that's definitely what's there, but that's just what my eye wants to find. And again, you adjust the weight. We draw on things, or we refer to things that we're familiar with. So if it is something landscapey, then we have light. Maybe there's an according light down here. We know if there's light in the sky, there's light on the ground. And we balance it all up again. No specific detail, nothing of anything, a theme or a motif, but out of all of these diagonal marks, we're starting to make a composition that we kind of understand. Let's try one more. Let's try it with some circles. Now again, the reason I've done this like this is precisely to show that if I don't make a particular plan, or if you just work with your marks, or you go out from an unusual or interesting new start point, then you're going to only have your own visual language, your own detail and mark making to rely on. The more you do it, the more you can enjoy finding things, and the more chance you have to say to yourself, is this really interesting? Is this what I want to be making? Is this something that moves me? Is this something that I find has a voice? And I think that's very important when we're making work, to ask, is this relevant to me? Does this speak of my experience? Does this speak of my experience recently, or is it perhaps something I remember? Does it remind me of any other artist's work? And that's also a really interesting thing, and that you shouldn't be scared of. If your work starts to look like another artist, it means that you're going into the territory that they explored. That means you can embrace the tricks and lessons that they learned and maybe add something to it. And if nothing else, you've learned to handle your materials in a way that you know has been familiar in the past, and then you can explore in a different way in the future with the benefit of experience. So again, we're working just with details and marks, not specific topics and themes, and we're seeing where it takes us. To finish, what I could do if I really wanted is then link all of this together and show that detail will draw the eye of both the artist making the work and the viewer towards some kind of result. And that result will always be much more than you could ever imagine. So if you work hard on your mark making and you work hard into the surface of what you're doing, you will discover new ways in which your visual language can communicate to you and to other people. And the challenge is to then follow it on that path and bring it to a sense of completion that you feel is both vibrant and relevant to your experience. So this is what it is. It'll be what it'll be. I wonder how you feel inspired to maybe follow some of these tricks and techniques. I hope you found the theory bit to start interesting, and I of course super appreciate you following along with these episodes of Artists for a Day. I'll be back as soon as possible with another episode, and don't forget to subscribe and comment if you like, and I'll see you soon. Thanks very much. Bye.